Hey, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Voices from the Desert. And, we should probably clarify.
Ow.
There's the howl that we're waiting for.
There it is.
We should probably clarify. The howl might confuse people that Murray and I are not actually in the literal desert.
I am actually.
Kamloops
is kind of actually desert.
Oh, okay, well, there you go. That's.
And I have coyotes.
Yeah, never mind then. I guess he is in the desert. I'm in the 8 months of the year, the frozen tundra of eastern Canada. But I know you get a bit of a frozen tundra too over there. You just had a nice little flood come through. So
oh my goodness, that was just very deserty, flash flood. It was luckily it appears to have gone around my house rather than through it.
That's good. So
I haven't gone down to the crawl space yet, but
the Lord has protected Murray. So again, welcome. We're going to get all caught up. Welcome to the podcast. My name is Joshua Hofford of Wind Ministries. I'm here with my good friend Murray Dewick of Samuel's Mantle. And Voices from the Desert is all about talking through the wisdom of people that have traversed the plains of the heart and have come back with something to say. And the desert is the inner life that we wander through, and the Father needs to terraform. I had a dream one time actually about that, where I saw the land being terraformed. It's a land of your heart. And so this is what we talk about. And we've talked about all kinds of things, from dreams to theosis, to our personal stories, to all kinds of stuff. And so we have guests on. You'll just have heard a conversation, two-parter conversation with a good friend of mine, Father Colin, who's now a friend of Murray's, about communion and the Eucharist.
Really appreciated him.
Really a conversation that kind of is underpinned by the sacraments. And what does that mean? Great conversation. So we've got a good one for today, and I'm going to turn it over to my dear friend and co-host Murray to introduce the topic.
All right. So, Josh and I have been kicking this around, and I think sometimes we're a little bit like a pendulum, and because, and I think the dream one maybe pointed this out, and maybe our original testimonies too. We are these prophetic guys functioning in charismatic culture. That's where we are, but we kind of have, because of our life experience, maybe, and the same Holy Spirit speaking in the year 300 AD. Or 500 or 700 or 100 is the same Spirit speaking now. We just love finding how the Spirit has worked throughout the church, throughout history. And
that's right.
And when I was a kid, I'm sure you can all imagine, I wanted to be an archaeologist, and I kind of am in my own way.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think I got teased too much about wanting to dig in the desert with a spoon that in the dirt, that I gave up on it, but so, one of the things we want to do today is kind of bring those two topics together. So, the pendulum swings back and forth a little bit, because we're both, when you walk, you're out of balance. The only time you're ever in balance is when you're standing still. So,
that's a good point. Yeah.
One foot is kind of the modern prophetic, one foot is kind of the desert fathers. And we just kind of walk like that, it's kind of.
And Murray and I just laugh at each other if the other one falls over because they're out of balance. So,
yeah, that's why we do this together.
Yeah, that's right.
Sorry, the verse about the blind and leading the blind and falling into the ditch in my brain.
That's right.
but that's why we bring in people like Steve Schroeder and Father Mike and Father Colin and all these wonderful traditions where the Holy Spirit has been speaking. And it's not that the Spirit is different, but the application can be a little bit different, right?
Sure.
So today we're going to talk about the prophetic. In early church tradition, because and we've really talked about that all the way through, because and we will more, but specifically documentation, and what did that mean, and where did that go, and how do you balance all that out? So with that, I'm gonna just punt the ball back over to my good friend Josh Hoffert to make sense of everything I've just said.
Yeah. Well, I don't think you can ever make sense of everything Murray says, but you can try.
Yeah. Like calling.
Yeah, that's right.
It's
like people who do the whole thing like Bob Jones was super deep, right? And really he was just like, what the heck did he say? I don't even understand any of that. Murray's not that bad. He doesn't need an interpreter. Is there the gift of interpretation of Murray? Maybe that's a
And maybe
spiritual
Jay
gift.
might have it.
Yeah,
Or
that's
Jay might
right.
have
That's
it.
right. I think that probably there is a spiritual gift for every marriage of interpreting the other person.
Yeah, probably.
Amazing how many times my wife tells me, "Yeah, obviously I knew that's what you were trying to say." And
Or we finish each other's sentences.
yeah. That's
So
right.
Jay
That's
and I
right.
do that a lot.
Yes.
So that's
Um,
prophetic gifting functioning right
that's
there.
right. So we like as Murray was saying, we've have this there's a storied tradition in Christian history that has really begun to inform Murray and I, especially over the last 15 years or so. Murray a little bit longer,
Because I'm
because he's
old.
older. But you know, it's really awakened within us a love for church history, the different forms that ecclesiology has taken, the different forms that church kind of just the orthopraxy is taken, right? What the church does on a practical basis. And so I love looking at there's people that follow us and are probably going, are you guys closet Eastern Orthodox guys? No, we're not really. At least I'm not. Murray might be.
I'm a charismanodox.
Yeah, we just love this stuff. And so we like talking through it. And so again, we're not we've said this a couple times, we haven't said it for a while, is that we're not trying to make an appeal for any particular wing of the bride of Christ and the body of Christ. We're just saying there's been a lot of really cool stuff.
And I think we should really honor how the Holy Spirit's moved in all our Christian traditions. And that's why I think bringing all these people in that we're so fortunate to be able to have access to, I think it's such a powerful thing.
Yeah, absolutely.
And allows us to love all the different until all the streams flow into one.
That's right.
Say, right.
That's right. So there's a few, probably about a couple years ago, I started this looking through the whatever kind of documentation you could find of the various forms that prophetic ministry took in the early church, and going as far back as directly following the apostles, because we see some of the practical expression in the book of 1 Corinthians in 12, 13, and 14, especially when Paul gives some instruction about what prophecy looks like in chapter 14 of 1 Corinthians. So we see a number of ways that it takes shape in the book of Acts, right, on a personal level, on a corporate level. There's lots of examples of that. And so I was looking through what are the examples as the one of the things that we've had to contend with in our day is a rising belief, especially in the last couple hundred years, that the gifts of the Spirit, classically called the charismata, have ceased to be anything. Whether it's looking at Ephesians 4 and apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, whether it's 1 Corinthians 12 and the 9 that are listed there, whether it's Romans 12 and the 7 that are listed there, right? It's that, okay, that manner of movement has ceased, right? That's one of the ways that people think today. There's a whole wing of the church that thinks that way. We call that cessationism.
They
wouldn't believe that.
MacArthur is probably the big poster boy for that, right?
And they wouldn't necessarily believe. It's not that they believe that God's not actively involved. They just don't see the gifts of the Spirit as being germane to the church today. The primary function of the church is to teach people the correct way of thinking about God. And I've heard verbatim Reformed guys say, and cessationist guys say, the more instructed in doctrine I am, the more pure my worship becomes. And so, I can respect their opinion, but I started going, well, okay, if that's the case, then we should see either after the after the apostles passed away, that there was no more examples of the spiritual gifts being practiced in the early communities, or we should see it diminishing to the point where it's inconsequential or gone within the first few hundred years. And so I was like, well, let's look through this and see what's there. Well, you come to find out that it's alive and well, especially when you read through the Desert Fathers.
Oh, absolutely.
And then ongoing in the monastic traditions, right? It's never you get onto the 12th century where you've got these they don't necessarily use the term prophet or prophetess, although sometimes they do. You have John the prophet in about the 7th century, living in the desert. He's a hermit. and people go to him for prophetic revelation. It's so much so that the name that's been accredited in history is John the prophet, because of the accuracy of the revelation. And he prophesied kings that were going to be kings, and leaders that were going to be leaders, and things that were going to happen to cities, and lots of examples of that. So you're talking, this is 600 years. This is a few hundred years after the gifts were supposed to cease, either at the canonization of Scripture or at the death of the apostles, kind of the two key places where you're going, well, this is quite a bit later. And you have this, and then you get into the 12th century. You have a couple of women that were known as prophetesses to emperors and kings, and Christian leaders would seek them out for revelation and guidance. And we can talk more about that as we go through this. But what Murray and I are going to attempt to do over the next few episodes is kind of talk through, one, why we think, what did it look like for them to practice this stuff in the early church? How do we see that maybe fitting in today? And kind of walk a bridge between some of the historical liturgical traditions and then the craziness of the charismatic stuff that we see today, and hopefully create, the pendulum swinging, eventually getting right into the middle where we're going, okay, we can recognize the Spirit is in this. So anyway, so there's a number, like, you can go as far back as Ignatius of Antioch, who was a disciple of John. So you're talking, and Ignatius wrote in so you have the apostolic letters, right, which were the apostles and what they wrote. And then you have the apostolic fathers, who are just after the apostles. They're called the apostolic fathers. And Ignatius was in that. So you have Polycarp, you have Ignatius, you have Barnabas, guys who wrote to, Ignatius actually wrote to the Church of Corinth. And we kind of get a snapshot of what Corinth looked like years after Paul wrote to Corinth. And that's so you can actually find all this stuff, and it's not necessarily widely disseminated in evangelical churches, because we kind of look at the Luthers, the Zwinglies, the Calvins, the Edwards. We look at we look at the Reformers and later, as opposed to some of these early. So we may not be as aware of them as say maybe someone that grew up in the Catholic tradition or the Orthodox tradition or the Anglican tradition, for that matter. But you see Ignatius writing specifically to the Church of Corinth, and in one particular letter, he talks to them about. I don't have it right in front of me, so I can't give you the direct reference, but I definitely could look it up, given a few extra minutes. Ignatius reminds them of a time that he was in their midst, and he prophesied over them and spoke to the division that was happening in their midst. Unwittingly, he said, "The voice of the Spirit spoke through me when and he called the people back to a loving submission to the leadership that was in the place." And he didn't know that there was all this division happening. And so he tells them, this is the voice of God speaking through me. He says, not I that cried out, but the Spirit spoke through me. Wow. And so we've got, this is after the apostles, all the apostles have died. Ignatius is standing as a bishop, and he credits himself with the voice of the Spirit prophesying and calling out. So revelation being shared in this context and addressing a very specific situation. So we see this stuff happening, right? And when you look through the early church documents, you can find a number all the way from the 1st century, where you look at the Didache, which we've talked a little bit about. The Didache gives practical instruction in chapters 11 and 12 and 13, I think, for how to deal with itinerant teachers, prophets, and apostles, and very specific instruction about what to look for in their lifestyle, what kind of things they should do in your midst, how you should take care of them, all that kind of stuff. So you're talking about very, very much just kind of codified practices in the early church that give space for, well, in the Didache, prophetic ministry, but in some of these other liturgical documents, just the operation of the gift of prophecy. And one of the first things I want to reference, so just can pardon my cough every now and then, I'm just finally getting over a cold, is, and I just get Murray's thoughts on this one. And this is from the book that I'm referring to is from the SVS Press, which is the St. Vladimir's Seminary Press. They have a whole series called the Popular Patristic Series. There's like 50 some odd books in the series, and they're all sitting back there on my shelf. I've been slowly working through them, and this one's called The Testament of the Lord and Worship and Discipline in the Early Church. And it's there's 3 or 4 different, actually, I think the Didache is in here. I think if I remember which particular ones are in here, but there's a number of instruction documents for the second book of Clement is here, and
oh, cool.
So anyway, there's a few different books in here that it's a compilation of from the early church, and so there's a number of practical instructions to what it looks like, what to look for in a bishop, what to look for in a leader. And one of the things that's said about the bishop, he says this, okay? And Murray, just get your thoughts on this.
Is this the PG-13 example?
Oh, yes. This might want to, if you have any kids listening, it's a PG-13 thing.
Come back in 5 minutes.
Come back in 5 minutes. It says this, the bishop should not, this is talking about the Eucharist, communion, so this is a great segue from the last episode, right?
Oh yeah, nice.
Yeah, we should get Colin's thoughts on this one too.
We definitely should
get Colin's thoughts on this. It says this: the bishop should not offer if he has ejaculated in a dream, but a presbyter should offer. So he's got to find someone else. Likewise, he should not partake of the mysteries, that would be the Eucharist, not as though he were polluted, but out of respect for the altar. When he has fasted and bathed in pure water, he may draw near and minister. In the same manner for the presbyter. So if the presbyter has ejaculated in a dream, he shouldn't do it. They got to go on down the line, right?
Yeah.
Oh
wow.
But what do you think about that, Mur?
Well,
this is pretty practical instruction.
What was the name of this document again?
This is the Testament of the Lord. This one.
This is called the Testament of the Lord.
Nice. That's the name that the SVS Press has given the compilation. But it is the Testament. Yeah, that's the Testament.
All right.
So
having that title,
it says Clement of Rome wrote the Testament out, and it's kind of a the style of it is these are the instructions that Peter gave to us because he was a disciple of Peter. Peter gave to us about what the church should look for when it comes to gathering, leadership, appointing elders, appointing deacons. It's very practical instruction. So this one about ejaculating in a dream.
Well, I guess my first thought is that if I was sitting in that congregation and I've been waiting for that bishop to show up, I mean, how often does the bishop show up? I can't imagine all that often. And I would think it would probably be a highlight of the year. And he shows up and then it's like, he's not even doing anything. You'd be like,
what did you dream about?
I'd be like, wonder what that guy had a dream about. And then if it was him and the presbyter can't do it, I'd be like, something's going on here.
Who's checking the sheets to make sure?
Oh my goodness. Yeah, how do they?
Anyway, wait a second. I think you have a problem here. You need to take a step back, Mr. Bishop.
I think that the discernment in the church would be going wild that day.
Yeah, they might just know. Does the Lord share that? Right? Like this is ostensibly Clement saying this is what Peter told us.
Oh right? My. Well, very practical, very practical.
That's right. Yes. Hence why you should get married and have sex all the time so that this never happens. Right.
Yeah. Well, it's funny that in the Orthodox Church, they told me, I was talking to this Orthodox priest, and he said that when the big split happened in 1054, something like that, where the Orthodox and the Catholics excommunicated each other, the real thing, it wasn't about the Philokae or whatever it was. We don't even need to talk about that. It was about the fact that the Catholics didn't like the fact that Orthodox priests had beards and that they could marry. And that was the real reason right there at that time.
Not the filioque, and that's what they all hinge it on, but it's really we want
we'll figure that out. It's such a minor thing, but the beard thing, that's gotta go. And this Orthodox priest said, well, if you're in our tradition, if you're a priest, you have to get married, because how are you going to understand the needs of the people if you're not one of the people?
Yeah.
How can you minister to them? And I thought, well, with that, I agree. And anyway, and I think in the Greek tradition, they don't have to have beards, at least not anymore. So there you go. So I see how I moved that away from that other topic.
Yeah, you did. That's right. That was so deft. That's right. So we'll have to have Father Colin back on about these kind of issues, right? And then maybe we can pit Colin against Mike. And anyway, it's just to me, reading through some of this stuff is just it's interesting what they highlight, right?
Yeah, actually, in the very next, that's an early church document by the disciple of Paul.
So right? it had to have been Well, you think about this. It had to have been this. We're supposed to be talking about prophetic ministry. It had to have been a thing enough, right, for someone
Yeah.
to say, "What do we do when this happens?" Right? Like
Yeah.
it couldn't have just been a one-off. For them to give instruction, it had to have been happening to the bishops, right? So for the like, there's enough. Hey, well, like I had this kind of dream. What do I need to do about this? How many people went to Peter and asked him that, or Clement for that matter, and asked
Yeah.
him that? Like, what do you do after you have this kind of a dream? And it's interesting. You can reference back to the conversation we had about dreams. Is Murray? Correct me if I'm wrong, because I think I can speak. I think I can speak for you on this. Is that people do come to us with those kind of dreams, wondering
Well,
what
it is.
happened, what does it mean, why?
The physiology. I think in Western culture we would really like to chop up the body, soul, and spirit and make them all different and only talk about certain things. But it really doesn't work that way.
No, it doesn't.
That we are a unit and everything influences everything.
Yeah.
And so therefore dreams like that, from the Lord's point of view, are equally as spiritual as any other dream, because God took on human form, right? So it is an issue that needs to be talked about, and people dream about. So,
for the record, okay, that the particular passage in question is not what it's trying to do is establish and recognize reverence for the Eucharist.
Yes.
Right. Because in the very next breath in this particular passage, it talks about widows that are menstruating, and that because they would be unclean, right? Traditionally. So if they're menstruating, they shouldn't come to the altar either. Right. So it's interesting that it's, we start on that note. But the only reason actually I would even pull that passage apart is because it actually ends that, and it's just it's not a long passage, but it ends with the order of importance, in the sense, not importance in the sense of how important the person is to God, but how people should be, what the order you should give communion out, the order that the Eucharist should be received in. And so, like, if you've been in a liturgical setting, there's an order to who receives the Eucharist, right? If you've been to the Catholic or Orthodox Church or the Anglican Church, right? Typically the priests receive first, right? The deacons receive, and then the people are invited. So that kind of tradition is we see this early on. So it says in this particular passage, after it talks about the bishop ejaculating, or the presbyter ejaculating, the woman menstruating, the widow menstruating, it says that the priest should receive first the sacrament, the bishop then, the presbyters after, the deacons, then the widows, then the readers, then the subdeacons. So it's all the leadership, basically, right? They go through. And then the next thing it says, and this is where we get to the point where we're finally talking about something germane to the topic at hand, is afterwards, those who have spiritual gifts. And the spiritual gifts are typically defined as in the early documents as healing and revelation. Those are really the two that are most commonly identified: healing and revelation as spiritual gifts. And there's probably more beyond that, but when it comes to the practical outworking of a spiritual gift, those are the kind of things that for instance, there's a passage where it says in on the apostolic tradition, which is a collection of teachings of the apostles codified into church practice by authors maybe into the 2nd or 3rd century. So this is by Hippolytus, and you're talking, I think, into the 3rd century with Hippolytus. And he says this: if someone appears to have received the gift of healing or revelation, a hand is not laid on him, for the facts of the matter will reveal whether he has spoken the truth. So when it comes to gifts and recognizing their use within the context of the early church community, essentially he's saying, like, if the person's healed or if the revelation is true, then it's going to speak for itself. So that's what Hippolytus is saying. And actually that particular thing is Clement also lays that out in in the same, a little bit earlier. Clement, you're talking 2nd century. And he says, if someone's received, regarding a charism, which would be a gift, if someone's received the spiritual gift of healing or of knowledge or of tongues, the hand is not to be laid on them, for the work is evident. They should, however, enjoy honor. So the work speaks for itself, is essentially what he's saying, right? But he does recognize that there are different types of gifts. So largely it seems to be categorized in healing or revelation, and revelation would not just necessarily include prophetic utterances about the future, but knowledge, insight, information, those kind of things. So there's absolutely, we see these things happening and accounted for in a very broad, very specific way, and also in a very broad way. Let's see. One of the things that we can touch on that I find really interesting, and this is one of the things we can touch on that I find really interesting. We were talking about this before we started recording, Murray, and I was laying out 2 different ways that that new believers were going to be addressed in on the apostolic tradition by Hippolytus, and then the testament by Clement, that they've got some very similar instructions regarding new believers, right? But a little bit different, right? So this I find a really interesting one. And bear with me, I've just got to find the passage. Here it is. So I'll just read these 2 things. We can juxtapose them and talk about the differences here. Because, and I'll preface this with saying that Hippolytus is writing to the Church of Rome, okay? And Hippolytus is trying to lay out what would be the typical teachings the apostles handed down about what it looks like to have a church and be in a church, right? But Hippolytus is very much a teacher. And so Hippolytus has seen the active gift of prophecy, and at this point we've come across the Montanist controversy. We'll probably address in a later episode.
Yeah, we definitely should talk about that.
Yeah, we'll talk through that, because it's interesting. Just a side note, that one of the significant appeals against the Montanist controversy was the manner in which they prophesy looks nothing like the tradition that's been handed down to us. So anyway, that's an interesting one. So, but we can get into that in a later episode. So they've had to deal with some contentious things when it comes to prophecy, and largely you had small gatherings in homes happening very consistently, and so in Hippolytus is dealing with lots of what's seemingly, looking into this, some aberrations within prophetic ministry, and so he's writing about. When he writes about spiritual gifts, he definitely gives a place for spiritual gifts, but he says the primary role should be teaching and the conveying of proper knowledge, because so many people are ignorant that the Holy Spirit will give perfect grace to those who understand and have the knowledge of the tradition of the right ways, right? So he's kind of dealing with this contentious issue. He gives place for prophecy, but he says, but prophecy should be subjected, I'm paraphrasing, prophecy should be subjected to the role of a teacher and a leader. The prophet should not be the main leader, is what he's essentially saying. And there's some value to that, right? To saying that. But then when we look at the differences between how Clement codifies practices for newcomers, and how Hippolytus codifies practices for newcomers. So listen to the differences. Just pay attention. This is for newcomers by Hippolytus. Those who come to hear the word for the first time should first be brought to the teacher before being allowed to join the people, and they should inquire concerning their work, the reason they've sought admission. And those who brought them shall bear witness whether they have the ability to hear the word. They might be questioned about their state of life, whether he has a wife, whether he's a slave, whether his master permits him. If he's a slave of a believer, his master should give a report. If his master doesn't give a good report, he should be rejected. If his master is a pagan, teach him to please his master, that there should be no scandal. If there's somebody who has a wife, or if a woman has a husband, so should they be taught that the man be contented with his wife and the wife with her husband. Somebody who is not married should be directed not to fornicate. They should marry in accordance with the law or remain as they are. But if there is one who has a demon, let him not hear the word of a teacher until he be purified. So practical instruction, right? When someone comes in to the gathering, they should first meet with the teacher, right? And his thought about the teacher is the person in charge of the gathering in the house. And you're talking about Roman houses, so this probably isn't like 5 or 10 people. This is probably more like 90 or 100 people, because the Roman villas could house that many people.
Wow.
Actually, the first example, from what I don't know the reference offhand, but I know I've read this. The earliest examples of churches are Roman villas with certain walls knocked out so they could accommodate more people.
Wow.
The first church buildings in the 1st century. Eventually the church occupied a lot of the pagan temples and repurposed them, but that took place much later. So Hippolytus is going, they should meet with the teacher should investigate their life, give them practical instruction about marriage, about their working relationship. Master slave would be a working relationship than you would think about it in the context of 21st century slave master language is way different today than it was 1500 1700 years ago.
Which would be a great thing to stick into a segue somewhere or to a session, just so people get that, because it surprised me how different it was.
Very, very different. Yes,
I think that one of the first popes was a slave, if I'm not mistaken.
Very possible. I couldn't say for sure, but very possible. Yeah. It was more a working relationship than it was a abusive relationship than we've seen in more modern times. Not to say that there wasn't abuses, but that's not the topic for today. But so the practical instruction, right? Well, then juxtapose that. So this is Hippolytus, right? And then if the master gives him a bad report, right, then you just reject him. Hippolytus is like, don't even let him come in.
That's it. He's done.
He's done. So Clement has a bit more of a
he's not too jaded.
He's got a bit more pastoral compassion. And he says this, those who come to hear the word for the first time, so again, the newcomer like Hippolytus, is really similar. Before they enter the congregation, are to be brought first to the teacher at the house. This is very practical, the house. Again, you've got these gatherings happening in houses where people are being equipped and taught and instructed. They're to be carefully examined so that their teacher may know why they've come and what their desire is. And if they've come out of good intent and are loving, they should be diligently instructed. Those who bring them should be advanced in years, faithful, and known to the church. So that's really interesting instruction. That's just a total side note. There's like this cultural obsession today with how the next generation is going to usher in the next great move of God. So there's always this like, the young people are going to come in and they're going to bring passion and energy. Then what's interesting about the early church is there was such a reverence for the elders. That
now that I'm older, I agree with them.
Yeah, there you go. Yes.
When I was younger, I was in the other camp. I just say I changed camps on that.
Changed camps because of your age. Well, if the young people are going to usher in the next wave of God, it's going to be full of complete craziness. But
I would agree.
And this is interesting. They go, the elders should be the ones bringing the people into the church, right? Today, we would say the passionate young evangelist should be the one bringing the people into the church. Anyway, I'm not saying it should be the same, because culturally it's quite different. We live in a much more culturally Christian climate, of course. So anyway, but that's interesting.
It's interesting with that statement, though, that the reason they're probably wanting the elderly people to bring them in is they've got some wisdom and some discernment about somebody's maturity level.
Exactly.
And it's not just about bringing in as many as you can, and it's about the numbers.
Exactly.
So, and
quality of life and depth of discipleship.
Yeah. So I that's a fascinating comment about how they saw somebody who could become a Christian, and they're also saying that these people don't even bother bringing them. I mean, we would be
Right.
like, "Wow, are you supposed to bring everybody?"
Yeah,
They're
yeah,
like,
that's
if they're
right.
like this, don't even bother. Like,
Yeah,
wow, like it's really quite a thought if you think about it.
yeah.
Like, can't Jesus fix all that? No, don't even bother bringing them.
Don't
They're
bother
like,
bringing them.
what?
Yeah, yeah.
That's
Wait.
kind
So
of
and that
shocking.
it's that's
Leave them out.
I like that's why I like studying it because it makes you think because they thought differently than we do.
That's
And
pretty fascinating.
we're not trying to say I mean Murray and I are not trying to say that's the way to do it.
Yeah,
We're
it's
saying
just odd to see it. I didn't know.
we,
Josh and I are like, you know, talking about this with you for the first time in some ways. So it's just an interesting observation, really.
yeah. So
That I would imagine you guys out there in podcast land are hopefully making too.
yeah, that's right. So then it goes on. It says and they should those that bring them that are advanced in years, they should bear witness as to whether they are fit to hear. Inquiries should also be made regarding their conduct and way of life, whether they're not contentious, whether they're gentle, they're humble, whether they're talkers of nonsense or despisers or lewd speakers or jokers or those who lead astray or those who provoke laughter. And whether any of them has a wife or, yeah, Murray, you're just out, those who provoke laughter. Don't laugh. Now I'm out.
Oh man, we're both out.
We're both out.
Also, today's podcast.
Yeah, well, and we are done. We retire voices from the desert. And then it goes on. Also, whether any of them has a wife or not, and if he has not, by his own intent, he should be patiently and diligently directed and persuaded in a kindly manner to mend his ways. So,
get married.
Yeah, basically, right? So interesting. Hippolytus says, just get rid of them. And Clement says, well, let's try and walk with them. So they different approaches, right? But then this is the kicker of it all, right? To me. And this is where the teacher and the bishop had the language can overlap sometimes because this is the next sentence. The bishop, moreover, shall take care of him in the Lord with prophetic statements that may lead him in the direction of purity. And if he makes progress, again, with the teaching of the apostles and afterwards with the gospels and with the perfect word of teaching, if he is worthy, he is baptized. So
interesting.
This is Clement. We're talking 2nd century. We're saying that when a new person comes in, they should meet with a teacher. Their way of life should be examined. If their way of life is such that we go, okay, we can work with this person. The next thing that should happen is the bishop should meet with him and prophesy over him. And so that's a
big telling difference, actually.
It is a big telling difference, right? And so Hippolytus says they should be given instruction. Clement says they should be prophesied over. That the bishop will take care of him in the Lord with prophetic statements. So he will prophesy over him. So this is my big question to any of our Eastern Orthodox followers.
Yeah,
is because I remember Father Mike saying he said to us personally before that the Charismatic Church and the Orthodox Church share the same back alley. I love that. I love that. It's really funny.
The Vineyard and the Orthodox Church are on different streets.
Yeah,
but we share a back alley.
Different street, but share the back alley. And so I see in the tradition I was raised in. I was raised in the Vineyard, but just kind of a love for.
Oh, we need to have Father Mike come back on now because we're gonna totally talk about his point of view without him being here.
Well, I'm not trying. I'm not trying to. Yeah, you might. I'm not trying to reference his point of view. I'm just saying that that statement I thought was a very profound statement that he made.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting because like they would we can get into it a little bit more, but and everybody, I just want to preface this by saying Father Mike and I met for like curry for lunch once a week for like 7 or 8 years, but I only ever went to like 9 services because I was an absolute coward as a charismatic because. One thing I thought maybe I would get burned at the stake. I don't know. I just and so we would talk a lot about these things. So but from their point of view, and I didn't say this, Josh, earlier on, from their point of view, they expect that in a service, because heaven's in the room. They really believe that in a service, heaven is in the room, that it's the church, in heaven, the church glorified and the church militant, the church on earth, it's together and everybody's there. that this whole "you've come into
Right.
Mount Zion" thing is happening in the service. So for you to see the angelic or stuff going on, it should be normal. They would honestly treat that as normal. And so it was always funny to me where I would tell Father Mike, I'll give you one example,
Please.
So Jay and I went to this service, and I wish I lived there still. I'd go to a lot more if Father Mike's there. I really would. He's such a good guy, and understands charismatics. He gets that. So so you're sitting, on the side. There's like a little pews along the sides of the walls, and everybody stands most of the service. And there's a really good reason for that. We should probably talk about it at some point. But you're if you're sitting, you're looking through people all the time because there's people standing in front of you. It's like being at a concert and everyone's standing up and you're sitting down, right? So I'm sitting down, and you have in front of the church, you kind of have this wall, kind of a fake wall with a door, and you have these icons, angels on both sides, and then Mary's in there, and John the Baptist, and Jesus, and that's what you got. And then behind these doors, the priest is getting communion ready, right? So I'm and the angels are in red. Blue represents heaven, red represents earth, and most people are wearing a combination of it because they're doing both, the angels. So I'm sitting there minding my own business, just trying to figure out what the heck's going on because people are bowing and making the sign of the cross, and I'm just getting the hang of this, right? And there's this guy in the middle of the crowd wearing red. I'm like, well, who the heck is that? I mean, like bright red. Like, what are you wearing, pajamas to church today? Like that's culturally really bad. It's like, wow, like, okay. So I'm like, who is that? And of course, I'm looking through 10 or 15 people just to see who that is. There's like 50 people in the room. And so when everybody sits down, there's nobody there. I'm like, what? And it really confuses me. Like, who the heck was that? Right. But when they sit down, directly through my line of sight is the icon of Gabriel on that wall wearing red. I'm like, what the? But it's on the wall. It's not standing in the crowd. And then when they come out to bring the communion elements out at the end of the service, they put it right on the spot. I saw that guy standing, like right there. I'm like, okay, I'm freaking out. And I told Father Mike, he goes, yeah, stuff like that happens. And he goes, hey, how'd you like the weather? Like, what do you think of the Canucks game?
Right,
it was just matter of fact. Like,
it's normal. Yeah.
Yeah, it's for me, it freaked me out because they don't see it as a sign of personal holiness. They don't see it as a sign of being, wow, you're really close to God. It's like, well, kingdom of heaven's in the room, so these things should happen, right?
Yeah, and
so it's just such a weird. It's hard to explain it without having experienced it, and it's good to go sit in a culture. And the reason that's important to me, is this one thought, maybe I'll just say from earlier on about dispensationalism and how I grew up in the Mennonite church being taught, well, prophecy is preaching. That's what prophecy is today. It's preaching. And I was like, I don't think so, after going Youth of the Mission. And being really around that, and you run into this ancient church culture. It's like, well, that's how it should be, shouldn't it? They're here, aren't they? I'm like, yeah. And it's just matter of fact. It's so opposite that it's actually a bit mind-blowing. So,
well, anyway. And that's that. So this is that. What the interesting thing to me is,
and we'll get back. Sorry, I'll bring us back online here. So I got it in my head. Sorry.
Yeah, no, you're good.
I'm good, aren't I?
Yeah, you are. The interesting thing is, when it comes to now, I'm not going to say that charismatic churches are trying to honor the traditions of the early church. That's something that we have.
I think we would like to.
I think we would like to, but it's not something that's necessarily a value statement talked about in charismatic churches. We'll just say that.
Yeah, I think that's true.
It's not a okay, what did the early church the conversation around the early church is getting back to power and displays of great healing and miracles and stuff like that.
Oh man,
getting back to the early church. That's a lot of times what we mean by that.
Anyway,
well,
I was going to say in my Bible school, we had to, like you get your picture, in your year-end, what do you call those things? You're in
a yearbook.
Yearbook. Yeah, you get your yearbook, you get your picture, but in the Bible school, when you have to put a Bible verse, right? And my Bible verse was, and I was picking a bit of a fight, right? It was, I'm embarrassed now, but it was, I did not come with wise and persuasive words, but with a demonstration of the Spirit's power, that your faith not may rest in the words of men, but in the power of the Spirit, right? And now I'm like, wow, that was a little cocky. But I was making a point, right, of this very conversation.
Yeah, and, that's right. Well, that's, I think, in having a fondness for the charismatic and the evangelical is what I see as a value in the early church in statements like that was made about the bishop. And there's another one
that's so important.
It's something that we tend to major on. Now we minor on other things that the liturgical tradition would major on, right?
Yeah.
But we major on things like that, where prophetic statements made by the leader to the person are vitally important in helping guide that person to purity. Right. Yeah. We may not use the same language, but we think it's absolute. I remember listening to Graham Cook talk about how they would take their prophetic ministry in the church that he was pastoring would take every person, set them down, and prophesy over them with a prophetic team, record those things, and then help them walk alongside them to see them walk out the things that were prophesied over.
That's wonderful.
But that's what I see happening right there. That's an early church principle. That's not the charismatics just invented it. No, it's a thing the Holy Spirit does. Beautiful. And we see right there codified in the way that the teacher and the bishop are supposed to interact with a new person coming in is prophecy should be normative. And we're going to talk about this stuff for a long time. So we'll have
we need to bring Father Mike on and just grill him on this.
We probably could. Well, we should bring we'll have to plan through that. We'll bring a couple different people on and talk through.
Grill many people.
How do you see it happening? I would love to bring some of the contemporary quote unquote prophets and say, well, what do you think about this stuff? So because there's a few other things. Well, there's a few other things that we'll reference as we're going forward, right? Because we've got.
Well, it's interesting. I'm just going to throw a thought because I just Eric Jansen. We that would be good to have him on one
for
day.
Sure.
But he just shared. I saw he just did this 15-minute thing because we were talking about how if you change your belief system, everything changes. Who you want to be with, how you want to behave, your identity, your life goals, and his example was about being prophesied over, about this encounter with God. And how, his dad's a Bible school teacher, or was, probably retired now, and he grew up in the church, and he was like suicidal. He's like, I'm done. I'm leaving this planet.
Right.
And then he got invited to, a vineyard thing back in the day. And so he's got a culture, he's got a liturgy, if you want to put it that way. And he goes to this meeting, and the power of God comes on him, and he shakes and cries, and the Lord shows up. And you just think that, wow, if you just remove that out of the church, and you just have teaching, not enough, right. You need this encounter with God. And from there, he's becoming a teacher, he's doing these things, but look at the need for the empowering moment. So to have the bishop do that, and then to know that, to set them on their path. So, there's an example of that set Eric on his path, and that they knew that in the early church, that this helps set somebody on the path. And you need guide rails. The train needs tracks to run on. And I think, can you hear that or no?
Joe, there was something.
There's a peacock in the background.
Oh, that was a peacock.
So
that's funny. Just
Mike probably caught most of it out, but it was loud, really loud to me, like a car screeching. So
yeah, that was funny.
You're probably looking at the look at my face, going, "What is going on?" Yeah, everyone, I have a peacock, and he came with the property, and he likes to sit right outside my window
and yell at Murray very loudly
when I'm talking to talking to people on Zoom.
That's funny.
So he's prophesying, I guess.
There you go. That's right.
But it's interesting because you need that, and it's funny. Like if you just think about the role of a bishop, again, I don't think that they would see bishops very often. How big is their area? And for the bishop to come up and prophesy over people, that would be a big moment. That would be a big deal. And
well, and it is, but the thing is that the idea of prophetic ministry is very much so a part of and an undercurrent to many of the gatherings. And there's also places where and we'll dive even more into this kind of stuff where one of the main the body of people that were very involved and active in early church life were widows. So you find a lot of instruction in early church documents about widows, because if you think about it, widowhood happened a lot more then than it does today.
Oh, for sure.
So we're talking about
in the Roman army fighting and
exactly. So and the life expectancy was much shorter, and especially for men. And so we have there's a lot of widows that, and Paul even talks about this a number of times about how to deal with widows and what kind of ways what we should look at when it comes to widows and their involvement in essentially in leadership. And one of the documents that talks about this is in Clement's Testament. One of the places he talks about appointing widows, he talks about like the lifestyle you should look at and all this kind of stuff. But one of the things he says is, you look through this and, what does she have kids? What's her devotion like? How has she been serving the community? Has she instructed them? Has she been a model? All these things that you look at for widow. And then it says this, the other thing you should look at when it comes to appointing a widow into a place of service is whether there has been revelation to the saints regarding her.
Really?
So, wow, yeah. So what has been revealed to the saint, little s, not big S. So we're not talking about saints in the sense of the the cult of the saints. I think this is what they call it.
We're talking about the people sitting.
We're talking about the people sitting in the church. Yeah,
with God.
Exactly. Has there been revelation from the Father about her to other people? We need to take that into account when we're considering her and the position she should have in the community. So
that's wonderful.
This isn't just that you should. Well, this isn't that you should just lay your hands and prophesy over her. This has been whether prophetic ministry has happened over her already and people know about it.
Wow.
So that's pretty cool that we're going.
That's really cool.
There's an expectation that this stuff
will happen. I think it was Father Mike. I could be wrong, but I remember he said to me, and I think I mentioned this previously, that he said it wouldn't be a stretch to see a bishop kneeling in the mud in front of some old woman in some village, because she's the prophet, she's a seer, and he's an administrator, and he knows it.
Yeah, which is beautiful.
And in our culture, right? Well, I if I got a doctorate degree, well then, I'm going to be talking to other people with doctorate degrees. I'm not right. And I remember again that story by John Wimber of somebody had a prophetic word for him, and they really respected this person, and he was busy preaching and going to meetings and doing stuff, and he was like, I don't have time. And they really wanted him to see this lady. So he finally begrudgingly said yes. I think he didn't have much room for the prophetic at that point either, and he just says, okay, I got 5 minutes basically. And he meets with this lady, and all she does is cry. And he's like, get on with the word. You're wasting my time. And then he finally realized it was the Lord crying through her, and then crying about his life.
Right.
And he was at first offended and angry. And then he realized the Lord was like, I think at that point, I think I remember the message correctly was you're doing all this service for me, but you're not spending a lot of time with me.
Right.
And it was actually and he got it. And it was that lady's ministry that just changed that moment.
Right.
Of being around this lady crying that changed so much of his thinking. Amazing.
And that's where I see
the Lord still does that.
That's what I love about the charismatic church, and what I've seen in my history with the charismatic church or churches that are actively involved in an awareness that the Holy Spirit is moving in a distinct way and people are gifted to do these kind of things.
Sorry, keep going.
We just see so much transformation happening in personal stories where the Holy Spirit uses the agency of prophecy or visions or dreams or whatever to radically transform someone or radically change them or alter the course of their life. So I love that. Hey, Murray, I think we need to wrap this one up.
Oh, good.
Right. I actually have to go pick up my kids from school.
Oh yeah. That's
an important thing.
That's your liturgy for today.
That is my liturgy for today, but we've got way more planned talking about this. We've only even briefly.
We need to talk about fools for Christ.
We've got to talk about, there's so much to talk about when it comes to.
People will really like that topic.
Yeah. That'll be a really good one. So, thanks everybody.
Part of this topic.
Yeah, that's right. It is. So thanks everybody for tuning in. We hope that you enjoyed the conversation. As always, we're holding these things and trying to follow the Lord and hear his voice and help people
we're just
follow
having a
him.
chat, and inviting you all in to sit around the table as we have coffee together and
matcha
in front of each other. That's right.
Yeah, that's right. So there you go. Until next time, everybody, be blessed.
Okay, see you all later.